Hi, and welcome to my channel, Quest for Faith. Before we get going here, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Love to grow this channel and do some good works with this. So today we're going to be covering 5 reasons that 7 books were taken out of the Bible in the 1800s. You heard me right, 1800s, not 1500s. So we're going to dive into that, and we're also going to just cover a brief timeline of the history of the Bible, and let's get into it. All right, so first off, before we hit in the 5 reasons, let's kind of give a brief overview of how the Bible was put together. Obviously, this is not going to be that in depth. I'm not going to sit here for 5. You could take a whole year to study this. So let's just get some points here. And I put this timeline together to try and put it all in place. And it's there's a lot that happened to get us here. So we have the New Testament was completed around 100 AD, right? Probably a little bit earlier than that. But and how the first 350 years of the church went is the apostles had written all these letters to different churches, and one church would receive the letter, like the Church of Rome, and other churches would hear this letter when they would visit, and they would copy that letter and take it back to their church. And that's really how the New Testament first spread. And so there was not only just the New Testament, there were other letters that other churches were reading during service in that first century. And so when we get to 382 AD in the Council of Rome, they had to figure out, okay, which books should we include in the New Testament? Which ones should we not? And that's what they did. So they came up with a list, and we have those books. And then shortly after that, they commissioned Jerome to start translating the books from Greek and Hebrew into the Latin Vulgate, which Vulgate just means common, and so Latin is the common tongue. And so that's really when they started putting the books together. And you can see there that they also had 2 more councils right after that reaffirmed what the Council of Rome did as far as what Scripture was supposed to be holding. I think Jerome finished his translation in 406, 404, somewhere in there. Don't completely quote me on that one, but I think that's pretty darn close. So the canon, the Scripture was set 400 AD. We go fast forward 1,125 years before anything was really hardcore questioned about what Scripture was. We had the invention of the printing press in 1439. The Catholic Church at this point actually starts printing different or translations of the Bible in German, French, Italian, Czech, and they started this in 1466. You have the Protestant Reformation starting in 1517. Martin Luther starts putting his Bible together in 1522, and he finishes it in 1534. And one of the things that Martin Luther did is he took a hard look at the sorry, I'm trying to find the place here. Okay, he took a hard look at the Old Testament. And there was even some books in the New Testament that he actually didn't like. But his fellow Lutherans that were following this movement said, you can't do that. You got to keep those in there. So he didn't really touch the New Testament, but he didn't like James because of the verse in James talking about works. But so Martin Luther took Tobit, Judith, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, Baruch, Sirach, and Wisdom, and parts of Daniel and Esther, and he put them in the appendix. And he did this, there's more to it than this. This is a brief summary, but essentially because the Jewish canon of his time and leading up for a few hundred years before did not have these books in their Bible. So that was his reasoning. So he moved them to the appendix. He didn't take them out, but he did move them and said that they're not necessarily canon. So then you have Henry VIII creating his Great Bible for the Church of England in 1539. Then in the Council of Trent in 1546, the Catholic Church reaffirms the same canon that was reaffirmed 400 or 1,000 years earlier, but they infallibly reaffirm it. And what this means in Catholic lingo is essentially like, it just means that there's no fault. This is truthful. There is no mistake that can be found in this canon of Scripture. And so that's what happens in the Council of Trent. So then you have the King James Version that was published in 1611. And what you're really looking at that point is the Bible doesn't change for roughly another 200 years. The King James Version still had those 7 books, but they were moved into the appendix called the Apocrypha. And in 1826, the Scottish Bible Society reaches out to the British and Foreign Bible Society and says, you know what, can we stop adding the Apocrypha in the Bible since we don't necessarily consider them canon? I know they've been in there for 1,400 years, but can we just scratch them? Because it's a lot cheaper to print our Bibles without these 7 books. And so that's where that movement started. And so they started removing the Apocrypha from most Protestant Bibles. And really by 1880, all the new editions were printed without the Apocrypha. So if you're like me and you grew up reading your NIV, your New King James Version of the Bible, there's 7 books you never knew about, right? So I knew that Martin Luther had done some stuff like this just from studying history. He went against the evil Catholic Church, which, yeah, they had some major issues, and some of his complaints were completely valid that were really fixed in Vatican I. But that's a totally different video and different story. But I had no idea that really it was less than 200 years ago that these books were removed from the Protestant Bible. So, and why is that shocking to me is I grew up in the Church of Christ. And so Scripture is very important. We study Scripture like crazy. It's something that we thrive off of growing up, right? So I was studying my Bible all the time. And to think 1,400 years after, really longer than that, right? So we're talking 1,700 years after the apostles, 1,400 years after the Bible was originally put together, we decide to scrap 7 books. Why? Why did that happen? So here's 5 reasons that I found, and I kind of already mentioned one with Martin Luther's reasoning. Reason number 1, it's not accepted by the Jewish leaders. Okay, so if it's not in the Jewish Torah, then, or the Jewish Bible, then yeah, let's just not have it. But what's the argument on the opposite side where that doesn't hold water? And the reason that doesn't hold water is during Jesus' times, there was really 6 different traditions of canon during the New Testament time period. So you had the Samaritan tradition, the Sadducees and the Pharisees each had different traditions of what they believed was canon. The Sadducees only believed the first 5 books were canon. The Pharisees believed more broadly. And then what is typically quoted and what the first century church had for the Old Testament, the sacred scriptures, was a Septuagint. And the Septuagint was a Greek translated version of the Jewish scriptures. And this was the one that was most commonly used throughout the world at this point. And this is the one this is probably I guarantee you, this is the scripture that when the apostles were going out starting new churches and Paul was going around, he would give them a copy of the Septuagint. Right? Here's the Septuagint. Read this. This is proving our point why Jesus is the Messiah. And so that's what they used. And so if the apostles in the Septuagint had these 7 books, and if the Jewish canon really wasn't finalized, some historians are even saying as late as 500 AD, that's a big issue for me to say, Yeah, so 500 years after, 400 years after Christ, the Jewish people didn't like those scriptures and they took them out. Some say it was in 97 AD at a council of Jerusalem. I can't even remember what that was, but so that's why that one doesn't hold up. Okay, number two. What was number two? Number two is they were not written in Hebrew, these 7 books. So the interesting thing is we do have copies of some of these books. I think Tobit, maybe Second Maccabees, was written in Hebrew. We have copies of those, or fragments of those scriptures. And this language thing doesn't really hold for me. And the reason it doesn't hold is the common tongue of the time, even 400 years before Christ, was not Hebrew. It was Greek. Thanks to Alexander the Great, right? And everyone spoke Greek. So if you were wanting masses to read what you were writing, you would more than likely write it in Greek. Hebrew was spoken in temple. They didn't necessarily speak Hebrew. They spoke Aramaic in Israel back then. Jesus spoke Aramaic. He also spoke Greek. And we think that just because of his conversations with the Romans, because that's what the Romans didn't speak Roman, they spoke Greek. And so to cut books out because of the language they were written, even if these books were in the Septuagint, which the apostles used to spread the word of Christ throughout the world, doesn't hold water for me. Like that's not a reason to take anything out of the Bible because of language. The next one that I found, and the next two are very similar, at least similar concepts. And number 3, it mentions purgatory. So there's a verse in Second Maccabees, I believe it is, where they mention praying for the souls of these soldiers that died in battle because they were holding idols, for their sins to be forgiven after death. And so that concept of, hey, there might be something like purgatory where you're cleansing. It's a cleansing process. And whether you believe in purgatory or not, but taking something out of the Bible because you don't agree with it sounds like an awful idea, because the fourth reason that I found was that a lot of those books in Hebrew talk about works, or in the Septuagint, these 7 books that were in the Apocrypha talk about works and how important it is for the things that you do and how you live your life. Yes, we are saved by Jesus dying on the cross and the blood of the cross. That is our ultimate salvation. But how our faith shows our works. And if you don't have the salvation by works thing, the concept there is it falls in line with what Jesus preached. You look at him talking to the rich young ruler, and he doesn't say, great, you believe in me, you're good. No, he tells him to sell all of his stuff. Sell your stuff and follow me. And the rich young ruler goes, I don't have that much faith. I can't do that. I'm never going to get into heaven. Because your works show your faith. It's hand in hand, right? So, those 2 reasons, just because you don't agree with something, does not work for me as far as keeping it in the Bible as far as taking it out of the Bible. I mean, there's definitely topics right now that Christians are dealing with in the United States, especially, that it would be pretty easy to take out a few verses here or there or change something, and then guess what? 200 years from now, there's going to be some dude making a video, just like me, whatever YouTube is at that point, saying, oh my God, can you believe that they took this out because they didn't agree with it? I had no idea this was in the Bible, and I thought I was following everything. So that's not a good enough reason. That's actually a horrible reason to take books out of the Bible. And then the 5th reason, it says that they're not inspired works of God. They don't state that. I've read a lot of the Bible. I dare say I've read all of it. And I don't remember anything in the New Testament, anything in the Old Testament, starting out being like, this is inspired by God. God is telling me to write this, except maybe the Ten Commandments, right? So that is a really bad argument to remove books. And I'm going to give you a bonus, number 6. So there's some people that believe that we took the Apocrypha out of the Bible because 400 years before Christ, the period of the prophets ended. And they try and make this argument that only prophets could write scripture, but that's not necessarily true. There was prophets that didn't write scripture. There were books in the Old Testament that were not written by prophets. And you would have to make that claim as saying like in Christianity, we have the apostolic age ended, right? So the apostles all died. We're not going to get any, that generation died. We're not going to get any new scripture. So anything written after that, we're not going to consider it canon, right? We have this cutoff of this time period. And you would have to have the same conversation with the Jews at that time, with the Hebrews. And you can tell what I said earlier about there being different traditions. That didn't happen. And even more so, there were prophets, right? There might not have been for that 400-year period that we know about, even if you read those books. But John the Baptist was a prophet, right? He was out in the wilderness prophesizing about the coming of Christ. So the argument for that, my bonus, doesn't hold water for me either. And this really, really bothered me when I was researching this and looking into this. And there's a lot of people that are way smarter than me on this. There's Catholics and Protestants that you can look up on YouTube and debate. I might even actually put a link in below about a really good debate that actually came out last week that I watched. But this was really troubling for me. And it started making me ask really hard questions about my faith. And where it sent me next, looking into the first century church, that generation right after the apostles, what did these dudes believe? These leaders after the apostles, what did they believe? I think you're gonna be interested to hear what they believe, because it really shocked me. Thanks for watching. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, and see you guys in the next one. Have a good day.